Church bells were already ringing on the morning my fiancé handed me over to a monster. I remember the strange stillness of that ride. White silk bunched around my knees, a veil pinned so tightly my scalp ached with every breath, a bouquet of roses shaking in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. My mother had leaned into the car window before it pulled away and told me I finally looked like someone worth choosing. I believed her completely. That's the part that still humiliates me. I thought the dress proved I was loved. I thought the ring sitting in Julian Vance's pocket proved I'd been chosen. I thought the man trailing 2 cars behind mine was terrified of losing me because he loved me, not because an entire performance depended on the world watching him try. His voice came through my phone, warm and steady, the same voice that had spent months finding every lonely place in me and learning exactly how to press on it without leaving a mark. "Stay on Millbrook Road," he told me. "Avoid the cathedral traffic. I'm right behind you, sweetheart." When I turned to check, his silver car gleamed 2 vehicles back, and he lifted a hand off the wheel the second he caught my eyes on him. He always knew precisely when to smile. I smiled back through tears, certain this was what love looked like. A man chasing you toward your own wedding, promising you'd never again feel invisible. "Are you nervous?" he'd asked. "A little," I'd admitted. "Don't be," he said. "After today, no one will ever make you feel unseen again." He always knew what to say, because he'd spent a year learning me. Before Julian, my whole life had folded itself into the back rooms of St. Anthony's Cathedral, where I mended other women's wedding gowns, torn veils, yellowed lace, missing pearls, dresses handed down through generations of brides who wanted to wear their mother's history down the aisle. I was good at making broken bridal things whole. What I never learned to fix was the quieter wound underneath it all, being the woman who made everyone else look chosen while nobody ever looked at her that way. Julian looked, or I thought he did. He'd wandered into my life during a charity fitting, dressed far too well for the room, with a smile that seemed almost embarrassed to be so gentle. A young bride had come apart in tears that day because her donated veil split down the center minutes before the ceremony, and I remember kneeling beside her with the torn lace in my hands, telling her that repaired things could be stronger than perfect ones. She stopped crying. Julian, watching from the doorway, stopped breathing. I didn't understand back then that my kindness hadn't touched him. It had informed him. He'd been cataloging me. How easily I trusted vows. How quickly I offered comfort to strangers. How a man who knew how to sound wounded could walk right through my defenses. He told me later that was the day he fell in love with me. I would learn, much later, that it was actually the day he decided I could be sold. "Nora," he said now, pulling my attention back into the car. "Tell me you trust me." I smiled with everything I had. There was a pause on his end that I mistook for emotion. Now I understand he was simply confirming the lie held together. The car turned onto Millbrook, cypress trees slicing the light into gold ribbons overhead. The cathedral bells growing louder with every second, each one sounding like a countdown toward the life I thought I'd prayed for. Then the first black SUV rolled into view at the end of the road. It didn't screech to a stop. It simply turned sideways and parked itself across the street, sealing the way forward like the city had decided, on its own, that this wedding wasn't happening. My driver's hands locked on the wheel. "What is that?" I asked him. He didn't answer. A second SUV pulled in behind us. Then a third. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel the pearls on my bodice trembling with it. "Julian," I whispered into the phone. Silence. Then his voice, suddenly sharp. "Nora, what's going on?" A man climbed out of the lead vehicle. No mask, black gloves, unhurried. That told me everything about how unafraid he was of being recognized. 2 more men fell into step behind him, with the calm precision of men running an appointment, not a crime. He opened my door himself. Cold air slid beneath my veil. "Miss Whitfield," he said, almost courteously. "Dante Serrano is waiting." My blood went to ice. Every bride in the city knew that name. Dante Serrano, the bride collector. Women traded his name over champagne at engagement parties like a ghost story. He didn't take wives, they said, because wives were already spoken for, already ordinary. He wanted brides, girls still holding flowers, girls on the very edge of forever. If his men arrived before the vows were spoken, the story went, the wedding simply never finished, and the woman never came home the same. "No," I said, and the man's hand closed over my wrist. I yanked back hard enough to send my bouquet tumbling off my lap. My fiancé is right behind us, I told him, voice shaking. He'll stop this. The man's face didn't so much as flicker. That's exactly what he's meant to do. I didn't understand the sentence. Not then. Behind us, tires screamed against pavement. Julian's door flew open before his car had even fully stopped. Nora! Relief flooded through me so violently I nearly sobbed with it. He'd come. He would fight for me. He sprinted toward us, tie askew, face bleached with what looked like panic. Get away from her, he shouted, and the nearest guard caught him before he'd covered half the distance. Julian swung wildly. The guard's fist caught him across the mouth and dropped him against his own car door with a crack that turned my stomach. Blood bloomed at his lip, bright and convincing. Julian! I screamed. Cars kept arriving behind us. My aunt, Julian's cousin, one of the cathedral staff, my mother somewhere further back, her cry cutting through the bells louder than anything else. Everyone watching saw the same picture. A groom bleeding in the street, a bride dragged screaming from her own wedding car, black-suited men taking her in Dante Serrano's name. And because the whole city already believed Dante was the monster, nobody thought to look for a second one. I fought harder as the guard hauled me from the car. My heel caught the hem of my dress and the silk tore. Not loudly, just finally, like something giving up. My bouquet hit the asphalt. White roses scattered and crushed under a polished shoe. Julian crawled toward me on his hands. Nora, hold on, he called. I swear I'll get you back. I believed him so entirely that I stopped fighting for myself and started fighting for him instead. Exactly the way he'd trained me to. Chase his voice, follow his road, cry his name like a lifeline. The guard lifted me off the ground and my veil snapped backward, choking me for half a second before it tore loose from my hair entirely. I reached for Julian one last time. Our fingers brushed. His hand closed around mine, and then let go. I assumed the guards had pulled us apart. It would be a long time before I understood that Julian released my hand first. Nora! He screamed as they forced me into the SUV. I love you! Every person on that street heard him say it. By sunset, the whole city would hear it too. Poor Julian Vance, the devoted groom, bleeding in the road for the woman Dante Serrano stole from him. That was the story Julian gave the world. It was also the story he gave me, and for a long while I wore it like an open wound. I hated Dante Serrano before I ever laid eyes on him. I hated his name, his men, the leather seat beneath me, the tinted glass swallowing the cathedral behind us, the sight of my own torn veil crumpled on the floor, like proof that something sacred had just been dragged through dirt. A guard sat across from me, unreadable, silent no matter how many times I demanded to know where we were going, no matter how I promised Julian would pay any sum they named. Finally, I asked whether Dante had ordered them to take me simply because I was a bride. The guard looked at me then, not cruelly, not kindly, just with a tired sort of certainty. Mr. Serrano doesn't need to be told what men are willing to lose, he said. The sentence made no sense to me, so I clung instead to the story I did understand. Julian loved me. Julian had fought for me. Julian would come. An hour later, the SUV passed through iron gates onto grounds so vast they felt less like property and more like a declaration. Black marble steps climbed toward carved doors flanked by columns and guards. I had repaired dresses for wealthy families before. I knew chandeliers and gold-trimmed dining halls and rooms where nobody laughed too loudly. But this estate wasn't wealthy in that familiar way. It was powerful in a way that felt older than money, the kind of place bought only after blood had already covered the deposit. They walked me inside without touching me roughly, which somehow felt worse than being dragged. I wasn't a victim now. I was cargo. At the end of a long corridor, a guard opened a set of double doors and told me to wait, then left me alone in a room so enormous it might have been a chapel. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen tears above rows of glass cases lining every wall. Cases full of veils. White ones, ivory ones, cathedral-length lace folded like sleeping ghosts. Beside them sat dried bouquets sealed under glass, broken rings, wedding photographs with the groom's face burned or cut away entirely, shoes, gloves, hairpins, torn scraps of silk, a bridal museum, a gallery of stolen weddings. I drifted toward the nearest case as though something in the room had physically pulled me there. A pearl-embroidered veil rested behind the glass, a silver plaque beneath it reading Adriana Cole, June 3rd. The next, Maeve Sullivan, September. The next, Sophia Lang, December. How many? I whispered to no one. Enough to lose count, a voice answered behind me. I turned to find Dante Serrano filling the doorway. Taller than I'd pictured, a black suit cut with a precision that bordered on severity, dark hair, a trimmed beard, a face beautiful the way old marble statues are beautiful. All edge, no warmth. It was his eyes that chilled the room, not empty, controlled. Like every soft thing in him had been burned down and the ashes kept in perfect, deliberate order. Nora, he said. My own name in his mouth sounded less like a greeting and more like an item being logged into inventory. Where's Julian? I demanded. Bleeding on a road. For an audience, he replied. He fought for me. Some men fight, he said. Some rehearse. You're lying. No, he said. I'm many things. A liar isn't one of them. You kidnapped me on my wedding day. Yes. The plainness of his honesty hurt worse than any denial could have. You collect brides, I said, my voice curling with disgust. His gaze drifted briefly over the glass cases. I collect proof, he corrected, that love is the most expensive lie men sell. You're a monster. Good, he said. Monsters at least tell the truth. I hated him so completely in that moment that the hatred actually steadied me. Julian loves me, I insisted. Something close to pity flickered across his face, and I hated that even more. Every bride who comes through that door believes she was loved, he said. You'll learn faster than most. I slapped him. The sound cracked through the whole gallery. My palm burned. His head turned slightly with the force of it, but otherwise he didn't move. The silence afterward was total. That, he finally said, quietly, was brave. No, I told him, chin lifted despite the fear crawling up my spine. That was deserved. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not amusement, not anger. Interest. Perhaps, he allowed. He crossed to an empty case near the far wall. Your veil goes there, he said. No, I told him. Every bride leaves something behind here. Then take my fear, I snapped. It's the only thing you'll manage to steal from me. His gaze sharpened at that. I'd expected fury. Instead, he studied me, as if I'd spoken a language he half remembered from somewhere. Keep it, he said finally. You'll need it tonight. I didn't sleep. They gave me a room larger than my apartment. Curtains white, a locked door I couldn't open from the inside. I sat on the floor in my ruined dress until my legs went numb, waiting for Julian, waiting for police, waiting for anyone to admit this had all been some terrible mistake. Near dawn, a maid arrived with tea and a folded robe, told me gently that Mr. Serrano preferred brides out of their dresses after the first night. When I asked what she meant by first night, she only lowered her eyes. When I asked how many she'd seen come through, she said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. I let her take the tea but not the dress. When she tried, I grabbed it back and told her to send Dante himself to pry it from my hands. A few minutes later, he did come, though he stood in the doorway rather than entering. You're difficult, he observed. You're a criminal, I reminded him. Both can be true, he said. He told me the dress belonged to him now because my groom had traded it away on that road. I told him Julian hadn't traded anything. Julian Vance owes me a debt, Dante said instead. Then take his money, I snapped. He has none I haven't already claimed. Then take his house, his pride, his blood. Why me? Because in my world, he said, stepping just close enough that I had to look up at him, when a man betrays me, he pays with whatever he's about to swear is sacred. His bride, I said, understanding landing like a stone in my stomach. Yes, that's disgusting. Yes, he agreed, offering that same brutal honesty instead of an excuse. Then you admit you're a monster. I never denied it. I asked why Julian would owe him anything at all, and Dante only told me to ask myself why a man in debt to a monster would suddenly propose to a woman who mended veils in a church basement. Ask why he chose that particular road. Ask why his driver never tried to run. Ask why he'd bled just enough to be seen bleeding. I threw a teacup at him. It shattered against the wall near his shoulder. He didn't flinch. Get out, I told him. Gladly, he said, but paused at the door long enough to add that when I was ready to stop defending the man who delivered me, he'd show me exactly what Julian had signed. I refused to believe him. I had to refuse, because if he was telling the truth, then every gentle thing Julian had ever whispered to me turned into a weapon retroactively, and I wasn't ready to admit I'd been kissing a blade for a year. I thought instead about the mornings Julian used to show up at St. Anthony's with coffee and small, careful gifts, honey for my mother's throat, a book about antique lace, because I'd once mentioned that old patterns carried stories in them, thin gloves, because he worried my hands bled too often for other people's happiness. He remembered my mother's medication schedule without being asked twice. He told me once, sitting on the cathedral steps, that wealthy girls only wanted to be seen, while I made people feel seen. I hadn't known what to do with that kind of praise except laugh. "You're not used to being chosen," he told me one evening under the archway, watching rain silver the street. "That's why you look startled every time someone's kind to you." I remember staring at my own hands because my eyes had filled too fast. "Maybe kindness just feels expensive," I told him. "Not with me," he said, and touched my fingers so gently I believed him completely. That gentleness was the lie that undid me. He never trapped me with diamonds. He trapped me with attention, with being told I mattered before I was ever told I was pretty. And because I'd waited my whole life to matter to somebody, I never once stopped to ask why a man like Julian Vance had suddenly needed me so badly. The first crack in my certainty came the next day, when a guard walked me back into the bridal gallery because Dante wanted me to see, in his words, where lies become permanent. At the far end sat a veil unlike any of the others, not displayed with any care, folded instead into a shadowed case, yellowed and torn along one ragged edge. I stopped without deciding to. "This one's different," I said. Dante said nothing. "The tear isn't from an attack," I continued, leaning close enough to study the fibers. "Someone pulled the lace open carefully first, then ripped it wider to make it look accidental. I repair veils for a living. I know panic damage when I see it. This wasn't panic. Something was hidden inside that seam." His expression closed entirely, though something behind his eyes went very still. "Don't touch that case," he said. I hadn't. "Don't speak of it again." "Whose was it?" I asked. "No one you need to know," he said. "That means someone you can't forget," I told him, and watched something shift in his jaw. "Curiosity isn't courage, Nora," he warned. "And control isn't strength," I answered. For a second, I thought he might actually punish me for it. Instead, he looked at me the way he had after the slap, as though I'd interrupted a belief he'd spent years perfecting. "You see too much," he said. "Maybe you hide too badly," I told him. He turned and walked away without another word. And that was the first moment I understood Dante Serrano wasn't hollow at all. Something old was buried in him, and it was still bleeding. That didn't make him safer. A wounded monster simply knows exactly where the knife needs to go. On the third day, he brought me proof without asking whether I wanted it. A folder landed open on the black table in his study, a copy of my own wedding route, printed on Julian's private stationery and annotated in red ink. Millbrook Road, 1017. Bridal car separated by 2 vehicles. Driver confirmed. Anyone could fabricate that, I told him. He set down a bank transfer next. The driver's name. Julian's company. "No," I said. Another document. A security schedule. Guards quietly pulled from the old road. Julian's own signature authorizing the change. No. He never once softened his voice or offered comfort. He simply kept laying truth after truth on that table, until my denial had nowhere left to stand. "Stop," I finally said. And he did, which surprised me more than anything else that day. "I need air," I told him. "The terrace doors are open," he said. "You're letting me walk out there," I said, disbelieving. "There are guards," he answered. "Of course there are," I said. "But yes, you may walk." "How generous of the man who stole me," I said bitterly. "Julian sold you," he replied, his expression unmoved. "I took you. I won't pretend my sin is prettier just because his was uglier." I actually looked at him then. "Was that meant to be an apology?" I asked. "No," he said. "Then what was it?" "A fact." I laughed once. A broken, humorless sound. "You're impossible," I told him. "Usually," he agreed, and I turned away before he could watch me cry. Out on the terrace, gripping the stone railing, I hated the perfect garden below me, the trimmed hedges, the flawless white roses that had somehow survived the day when mine hadn't. That evening, Dante brought me the last piece, a recorder, set on the table between us, with a warning that this was the final thing he'd show me unless I asked for more. "What is it?" I asked. "The truth without any paper attached?" He said. "I don't want it." "Then don't press play." He turned to leave. "Wait," I said. He stopped. "If I listen," I asked, "will it kill whatever's left of me?" Something almost human moved behind his eyes. "No," he said quietly, "but it will kill what he built." I stared at that recorder for an hour after he left, before I finally pressed play. Julian's voice filled the room, warm and familiar, and utterly damning. "Camille can't be involved," he was saying. "She's carrying my child. Serrano wants a bride, not the woman I actually love. Nora believes everything I tell her. She'll wear the dress, take the road, cry my name like it's real. By sunset, the whole city will blame the bride collector." The recorder slipped out of my hand. I remember the floor rising to meet my knees. I remember a sound leaving my body that didn't feel like mine. He had never loved me. He had rehearsed me. Every coffee, every remembered detail, every soft look across the chapel had been building not a marriage but a believable tragedy. My wedding day had never been a wedding day to him. It had been a delivery date. Dante didn't come in when the door opened. He stayed at the threshold. "Nora," he said. I couldn't answer him. "I'm right outside," he told me. "Say my name if you want me. Otherwise no one comes in." Then he pulled the door nearly shut and left it open just a crack. I cried until my throat gave out. For the girl in the bridal car, for the version of myself who used to think being seen was the same thing as being loved, for every soft moment Julian had ever manufactured, just to measure how far he could move me. Hours later, when I finally crawled to that door, Dante was still there, sitting in a chair across the hall with his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up, waiting the way a man waits when he knows he has no right to enter, but can't bring himself to leave either. "Why?" I whispered. He stood. "Why what?" he asked. "Why are you still here?" "Because the first night after the truth is dangerous," he said, "for anyone who has to live through it. You should be happy," I told him. "You were right about all of it. Being right has never made grief any quieter," he answered, and I hated how little that sounded like anything Julian would have said. Julian's words had always come wrapped in ribbon. Dante's arrived bruised and unpolished, without a shred of performance in them. "Did you know before you took me?" I asked. I knew Julian had arranged the road. "Did you know he never loved me?" His eyes dropped for half a second. "I suspected," he admitted, "and somehow the honesty of it hurt worse than a lie would have. And you still took me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wanted his bride." The old hatred flared back up through the grief. "There's the monster," I said. "Yes," he agreed, without flinching from it. I wanted to watch a man who betrayed me lose the thing he swore was sacred. But it was never sacred to him. I wasn't sacred to him. I know that now. "No," I said, my voice rising. "You knew enough. You knew he'd handed you that road. You knew exactly what kind of coward he was. And you still let them drag me through the streets in white silk like part of your revenge." He went completely still. "Yes. Say more than yes," I demanded. And for the first time I watched him struggle, not with anger, but with something closer to shame. "Julian sold you," he said slowly, "but I still took you. I made your pain useful to my own pride. I made your wedding dress part of my own wound. I can't hide my sin behind his." "Are you apologizing?" I asked. "I'm trying," he said. "You don't sound like you know how." "I don't," he admitted. Something about that honesty struck deep. This man, the bride collector the whole city whispered about in fear, stood there attempting an apology like it was a language he'd only just started learning, badly, but was determined to speak correctly. "Then try harder," I told him. He swallowed. "I'm sorry, Nora," he said finally. "Not because Julian was worse than me, not because I eventually showed you proof, not because I never touched you. I'm sorry because before I ever learned your name, I made you part of something broken in myself." I cried again, quieter this time. In an entire year with Julian, I'd never once heard him admit fault without dressing it up first. Dante's apology had no ribbon around it at all. Maybe that was exactly why it landed cleaner. The next morning he handed me an envelope. Cash, a new identity, an apartment address in another city, copies of every piece of evidence against Julian, and a phone with a single number saved. "What is this?" I asked. "A door," he said. You're letting me go? Yes. Why? Because if I keep you now, I become exactly what you called me. I almost laughed. You already are, I told him. Perhaps, he said. But even monsters notice certain lines once they've crossed them. And if I leave, I asked, you leave too? No guards? None, he confirmed. One car will follow at a distance for 2 days. Not to bring you back, but to make sure Julian can't find you before you've decided what to do with the truth. I never agreed to that, I said. You don't have to, he told me. Call that number and say the word, and the car disappears. You expect me to trust you, I said, suspicious. No, he said. I expect you to test me. That was the real difference between the two men. Julian had demanded trust and called it love. Dante offered proof and called it nothing at all. I left that afternoon in a plain gray dress from the closet, the envelope in one hand, and I didn't look back once when the gates opened behind me. For 2 days, I stayed alone in the apartment he'd arranged, trying to remember how to exist without a veil, without a groom, without the story the whole city had already written for me. But the world outside that estate wasn't the world I'd left behind. The papers called me Dante Serrano's stolen bride. Some said I'd been ruined. Others whispered I'd gone with him willingly. Julian gave one tearful public statement, bruised lip, red eyes, trembling voice, swearing he'd never stop loving me, that Serrano had taken his bride but could never take what I'd meant to him. The city wept for him. Women sent flowers to his door. My own mother was hounded by reporters until she stopped answering hers. Julian's lie traveled easier than my truth, because his had been staged in daylight, while mine had happened behind walls nobody wanted to look past. On the third night I called the number. Dante answered on the first ring. Nora, he said, unsurprised. I want my story back, I told him. A pause. Then come back for it, he said. I'm not coming back as your bride, I warned him. No, he said. Come back as yourself. I did go back. Not because I loved him. Not because I'd forgiven a single thing he'd done. And not because I had nowhere else to go. I went back because Julian had stolen more than a wedding from me. He'd stolen my voice, and the only person who'd ever handed it back to me without demanding I smile through the truth was the very monster who'd taken me in the first place. The second time I walked through those doors, I did it on my own feet. No dress, no veil, no bouquet. Even the guards seemed to notice the difference and lowered their eyes. Dante met me in the entrance hall. You came back, he said. By choice, I told him. Don't make me regret it, he said. I wouldn't dare, he added. And it was almost, a joke. We started badly, and I won't pretend otherwise. Healing wasn't gentle or linear for either of us. Dante stayed exactly as controlling, exactly as cold as he'd always been, still capable of silencing a room with one quiet sentence. Some mornings I woke to shouting from the lower floors and understood that someone had crossed Serrano blood, and was learning firsthand why the city feared him. Some nights he vanished into meetings where mercy simply wasn't on the guest list. I didn't pretend not to notice any of it. Once, after watching a man dragged bleeding across the courtyard, I confronted him in the gallery. You can't ask me to see the man buried inside the monster, I told him. If you keep feeding the monster right in front of me. My world doesn't heal with lace, Nora, he said. No, I answered, but not every wound needs blood. Some do, he said, and some need courage, I said back. Don't confuse softness for morality, he warned. Don't confuse violence for strength, I told him. We stared each other down until he finally walked away, rather than say something neither of us could take back. I spent my days in a restoration room he'd built beside the gallery, after I complained the veils were being preserved like corpses instead of cared for like memories. You complain often, he observed once. You kidnap often, I reminded him. Not recently, he said. Congratulations, I said, and he nearly smiled. He noticed that I noticed things like that. Small changes came first. He stopped calling me the bride. The first time he used my actual name without meaning to, I almost missed it entirely. We were standing over Isabella's ruined veil, the one he'd forbidden me from ever discussing. I'd asked permission to mend the seam, not for his approval, but because I'd realized this particular scrap of lace wasn't just evidence in his gallery. It was the bone underneath his scar. Leave it ruined, he told me. Why? Because it deserves to be. The veil never betrayed you, I said. His eyes flashed. The woman wearing it did. Then why punish the fabric for it? I asked. He had no answer, so I kept going. You keep broken things around you, so you never have to admit anything can actually heal. You think thread can fix me? He asked. No, I told him. I think you're afraid I might prove that something survived. He watched over my shoulder for a long while as I worked. Isabella's lace was old and brittle, the tier precise in a way panic never is. Eventually, I found the hidden channel sewn into the seam. A transmitter, he told me flatly. Isabella Conti had been chosen for him when he was 26, from a family that promised alliance through marriage. She was beautiful the way old paintings are beautiful, still and pale and perfect. On their wedding night, she wore that veil straight into the Serrano chapel, smiled at him by candlelight, and let his enemies in through the private gate hidden inside her own lace. 3 of his men died before dawn. His uncle lost an eye, and Dante killed his first bride with his own hands after catching her trying to run through the east corridor. Her last words? I asked before I could stop myself. He looked at the veil instead of me. A bride is the easiest lie a man ever believes, he said. The room went cold around us. So you believed her, I said. His gaze snapped up. I killed her, he corrected. No, I said softly. You believed her, and then you let her decide what every bride after her would mean to you. Anger crossed his face fast enough that I stepped back instinctively. He caught himself, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, the anger had been reined back in, though not erased. Careful, Nora, he warned. I am careful, I told him. That's exactly why I'm telling you the truth, instead of what you'd rather hear. And what would I rather hear? He asked. That you're a monster because one bride made you into one? I said. His silence answered that well enough. But that isn't true, I pushed. Isabella gave you a wound. You built this entire gallery yourself. He left without another word. That night I woke from a nightmare with Julian's voice looping in my ear. Tell me you trust me, tell me you trust me, and stumbled out of bed unable to breathe, only to find Dante sitting in a chair right outside my door. Do you sit there every night? I asked, embarrassed by how broken my own voice sounded. No, he said. Liar, I said. Sometimes, he admitted. Why? Because trauma comes back at night. And you know this, because... I started, and his expression finished the sentence for me. Why didn't you come in? I asked. Because you didn't invite me, he said simply. And that simplicity undid me completely. Julian had walked through every soft place in me without ever asking permission, and called it intimacy. Dante, who had once physically pulled me off a road against my will, now stood outside a locked door because I hadn't opened it myself. You can come in, I whispered. He didn't move right away. Are you sure? He asked. I nodded. He stepped inside and stayed by the window, far enough away not to crowd me. I hate that I still hear him, I admitted. You loved the voice before you understood what it was carrying, he said. That makes me feel stupid. It makes you human. Do you always answer pain like it's a verdict? I asked. I don't know another way to answer it, he said. Try, I told him. You weren't stupid, he said slowly, like he was choosing each word by hand. You were lonely, and he noticed. That isn't your shame. It's his weapon. I cried quietly after that, and he didn't reach for me first. He waited until I reached for his hand, and only then did he offer it. Warm, scarred across the knuckles, careful around mine. That was the first night I fell asleep with Dante Serrano sitting beside my bed, his open hand resting there for me to take or leave as I chose. Love didn't arrive as a lightning strike between us. It arrived as small, deliberate restraints, a door left open, my name spoken gently instead of ordered, truth handed over without decoration, a hand offered only after I'd already reached first. He learned me slowly, as if wanting anything at all still felt like weakness to him. I learned him slowly too, because trusting a monster only works if he's finally willing to stop hiding behind the word. He still failed plenty of days. Once I overheard him ordering a debtor's fiancé brought in as leverage and marched straight into his study. If you do that, I leave, I told him. The room went dead silent. His men looked at me like I'd stepped in front of a loaded gun. This doesn't concern you, he said. Every bride you turn into a lesson concerns me, I shot back. She isn't innocent, he said. Then punish her crime, I said, not her dress. Leave us, he told his men, and they obeyed instantly. Alone, he told me not to challenge him in front of his men again. Then don't shrink in front of them, I told him, and that landed. You think mercy makes me small? He asked. No, I think you're terrified it will, I said. You know nothing about the cost of mercy in my world, he said. And you know nothing, I told him, about the cost of being treated like a symbol instead of a person. We stood there breathing hard at each other until he finally picked up the phone and reversed the order himself. He never thanked me for pushing. I never expected him to. But that evening, when I walked into the gallery, the empty case reserved for my veil had been removed entirely. In its place sat a plain wooden table with sewing lamps and thread, and room to actually work. Don't look so pleased, he said, watching me touch the edge of it. I'm not, I lied. You are, he said. Maybe a little, I admitted. You make disobedience inconvenient, he told me. You make change dramatic, I answered. It feels dramatic, he said. That's because you haven't practiced yet. There it was again. Almost a smile. I started repairing more than lace in that room. I couldn't fix a man, but I could repair the meaning of the things surrounding him. A veil didn't have to be a trap. A ring didn't have to be a shackle. A bride didn't have to be a lie. Slowly, against both our better judgments, Dante began watching not the objects I mended, but the reasons behind why I bothered. One afternoon I found him holding my old wedding dress, pulled from storage. The tear from the road still slashed through the skirt. Why do you have that? I asked, stiffening. I was going to burn it, he said. My heart lurched. No, I said. I know, he answered, looking at the tear. That's exactly why I didn't. Why would you even want to? I pressed. Because I hate what happened to you in it, he said. So do I. Then why keep it? Because I touched the torn silk and it reminds me I survived the day Julian built for me. He studied me a long moment. You turn wounds into testimony, he said. You turn them into rooms, I answered. And you think yours is healthier? He asked. No, I said. But mine leaves space for tomorrow. That night he asked me to dinner without any guards present. Not an order, an actual question. Would you join me? I looked up from my sewing. Did Dante Serrano just say would? Don't make me regret grammar, I told him. I went anyway. Dinner was quiet and clumsy at first, neither of us skilled at harmless conversation, both of us aware of the road neither wanted to mention. Eventually he asked about my mother, and unlike Julian, who'd only ever gathered facts to use as leverage later, Dante asked once and actually listened to the whole answer. I told him how she raised me alone, cleaned church offices at night, saved scraps of lace because she believed nothing beautiful should ever go to waste. How she taught me to sew from women who couldn't afford new dresses but still deserved to feel honored on their wedding day. That's why you believe torn things deserve patience, he said. Yes, I said. He nodded like he was filing the truth away somewhere sacred. Who taught you that broken things deserve to be put on display? I asked. He didn't answer for so long I assumed he wouldn't. Then, no one. I taught myself, after deciding that healing felt too close to forgetting. Now, he added, looking at me across the candlelight, I'm less certain of that. That was how Dante loved me before either of us called it love. Through uncertainty, through pauses, through choosing not to cause harm when harm would have been easier. My own feelings frightened me because they didn't erase anything he'd done. He'd taken me. He'd made me part of his revenge. He'd shown me that gallery like a threat. But he'd also apologized without begging for forgiveness. Freed me while wanting desperately to keep me. Waited outside doors he had every right to walk through. Reversed orders because I told him a bride wasn't a weapon. Started saying my name like it actually meant something. One evening, rain hammered the tall gallery windows while I stood beneath Isabella's repaired veil. It didn't look beautiful exactly anymore. Some scars can't be hidden without lying about them. But I'd mended the tear in a way that left the break visible. Silver thread holding old lace together honestly. Dante entered quietly. It looks different, he said. It is different, I told him. You left the scar showing. Repair doesn't mean pretending the damage never happened, I said. He stepped closer. You say things like that to torture me. No, I said. To reach you. Something shifted in his face. The guardedness was still there, but underneath it sat pure exhaustion. Years of carrying a room full of dead vows. Years of calling grief power, because power sounded less helpless than grief did. Why? He asked. Why what? Why reach me? The answer came before I could soften it. Because I think someone should have reached you before you became this. The rain filled the silence between us. His jaw worked once like he'd bitten down on something. "Don't pity me," he said. "I don't," I told him. "Then what is this?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. He looked almost angry at that, though not at me, at whatever was growing between us. "I do," he said. My heart stopped. He stepped closer, slowly, always slowly now, as though he'd trained himself to give me every chance to refuse him. "I know exactly what this is," he said, "and I hate that I know. Nora, I spent years believing love was the door Ruin walked through. Then you walked into my house wearing the dress of a man who sold you," he continued, "and somehow became the first person who never once used my own weakness against me." I couldn't speak. "I thought wanting someone just handed them a knife and showed them exactly where to aim it," he said, "but you never reached for the knife." "Maybe I didn't want to hurt you," I said, too softly. His eyes closed for a second. When they opened, the monster was still there, but for the first time he looked like a man standing in front of a cage he'd built with his own hands, realizing the door had never actually been locked from the outside. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what? For stealing you, for making you part of my wound, for calling it punishment when it was really pride, for letting you believe I was only ever a monster, because admitting anything else felt harder." My eyes filled. "You scared me," I said. "I know. You hurt me. I know. You made me hate you. I earned that. And then you sat outside my door all night because I was too afraid to sleep," I said. His throat moved. "Yes. You gave me truth when a lie would have been so much easier. Yes. You let me leave. Hardest thing I've done in years." That honesty cracked something open in me. I stepped closer. "I was afraid I only trusted you because Julian was worse," I admitted. He went still, and I finally understood it myself as I said it. Julian had given me softness with a hook buried inside. Dante had given me pain, but he'd always left the door open. "Nora," he said, breath changing. "I'm not saying you're good." "I know," I told him. "I'm saying I've watched good fight its way through you anyway." His eyes darkened, not with anger but with something held so tightly it looked almost painful. "Don't say that unless you mean it," he warned. "I mean it," I said, voice shaking. I saw the real man buried inside the monster, the one who still remembers every single name in that gallery, who can level a room with one sentence but waits outside a locked door because he wasn't invited in, who thinks he became unlovable and still looks relieved every time someone tells him otherwise. He looked away, but not before I saw exactly what my words had done to him. "I never thought I could love anyone," he admitted. "Not after Isabella. Not after what I let myself become. But you," he looked back at me. "You made me remember the man I buried, because I thought he was too weak to survive any of this." I was crying now, not from Julian's old wound but from something new and terrifying and entirely alive. "I love you," Dante said, with no charm dressing it up, no performance behind it at all. It sounded like surrender. "I love you in a way that terrifies me," he went on, "because for the first time in years I don't want to own what I love. I want to be worthy of standing beside it." I placed my hand flat against his chest, right over his heart, and felt it pounding hard beneath my palm. "I love you," I whispered back. "Not because you saved me from Julian, not because you're safe. You're not safe, Dante, but you're real. I've spent my whole life touching other women's love after somebody else had already worn it, believing that was all I'd ever get to keep for myself. Julian saw that loneliness in me and used it. You saw it too, and instead you stopped letting me be ashamed of it." He bowed his head, and for one impossible second, the most feared man in the entire city looked breakable. "Marry me," he said, then stepped back fast, as if his own words had frightened him more than anything else that day. He drew a ring from his coat, dark and old, a black diamond set in Serrano gold, and set it on the table between us instead of taking my hand. "Not because you need protecting," he said. "Not because you owe me forgiveness. Not because of what Julian did to you. I'm not asking a stolen bride to marry me. I'm asking Nora Whitfield, the woman who walked out of my house and chose, on her own, to come back. Marry me only if, knowing everything true about both of us, you still want me." I looked at the ring, then at the repaired veil across the room, then at the man who had finally stopped hiding behind the word monster entirely. I picked up the ring myself and pressed it into his open palm. He froze. I held out my hand instead. "Put it on me," I whispered. Not as your trophy. His voice roughened. As what then? As the woman choosing you. His fingers trembled, sliding the ring onto mine. I'd once worn Julian's ring and felt chosen by an elaborate lie. This one felt heavier, not because it owned me, but because it actually carried truth inside it. We married 3 days later in the private chapel on the estate. I didn't wear white this time, never again for another man's story. I wore ivory silk with no veil, hair loose. My mother stood there trembling under Serrano protection, crying quietly because she'd seen every piece of evidence and heard the recording and still couldn't fully understand how the man she'd once blessed had staged my own kidnapping like a piece of theater. Dante stood at the altar in black. No society guests, no cameras, no flowers arranged for spectacle, just a nervous priest and the plain truth. My mother held my hand before giving it to me instead of to any man, and Dante waited without reaching until I stepped toward him first. His vow was simple: I will be a monster to the world whenever the world demands it, but I will never be your cage. Mine was quieter. I didn't come here to save you. I came to stand beside the man who finally chose truth after becoming fluent in darkness. When he kissed me, it wasn't the kiss of a man who'd won something. It was the kiss of a man who'd been entrusted with something precious and was terrified of failing it. The mansion shifted in small ways after that, ways people pretended not to notice. The bridal gallery didn't disappear. I refused to let him erase his own history simply to escape the shame of it. But the room itself transformed. Some cases opened, some items went home to their original owners. Some names were finally restored to their proper stories. My own empty case became a permanent work table. His men started bringing him problems before they turned into punishments. Not always. The world didn't turn gentle overnight just because I'd married a dangerous man. But sometimes, he paused before reaching for the cruelest possible answer. Sometimes he asked what I saw first. Sometimes he actually listened, and every time he did, the men around him learned a different kind of fear. Not that their boss had gone soft, but that his wife could genuinely make him think. I became Mrs. Serrano first in whispers, then in lowered heads, then in doors that opened before I'd even reached them. He never once called me a queen. Other people did. I never bothered correcting them. Months passed before I finally brought up Julian's name again. Not because I'd forgotten anything, but because betrayal doesn't dissolve just because love has started growing around it. Sometimes happiness only turns the old wound louder, because you finally have enough peace to actually hear how badly it hurt in the first place. One night I found Dante in his study and set Julian's old engagement ring on the desk between us. I'd kept it in a box, not because I wanted it, but because I needed to remember exactly what the lie had looked like. "What do you want done with him?" Dante asked. "I don't want him dead," I said. "Unfortunate," he replied. "For you or for him?" I asked. "Both," I admitted, and almost smiled before the feeling passed. "I want him to see me," I said. He leaned back. "He's seen you." "No," I said. He saw a lonely girl he could train into a bride. He saw a woman screaming his name on a road. He's never once seen what became of the bride he handed over. Dante's eyes sharpened. "You want the truth made public. I want his lie to die in the exact place he made it powerful," I said. He understood before I finished. "At an altar," he said. I nodded. "Find him." He found Julian within a day. Tragic groom, public victim, beloved survivor of Dante Serrano's cruelty. That was the story the city still believed, right up until we learned he was marrying Camille Foster that Saturday. Camille, the woman from the recording, the one carrying his child, the one he'd called his real future while arranging mine as a sacrifice. When Dante handed me the file, I opened it calmly, almost too calmly. The church, the guest list, the press notices. Julian had rebuilt himself beautifully. Sympathy had polished every rough edge off him. Camille's family had welcomed him as a wounded man who deserved a second chance at happiness. The tragedy he'd sold them was me. He'd turned my disappearance into a credential for a better life. I closed the file. "Then we shouldn't be late," I said. Dante studied me. "Nora, I know what you're about to ask," I told him. "Are you sure?" He asked anyway. I looked at the black diamond on my hand. "He turned my wedding into a delivery," I said. "I'll turn his into a confession." That Saturday, the cathedral filled long before noon. Wealthy guests packed into every pew. white flowers climbing the pillars, cameras waiting outside. Julian stood at the altar in a black tuxedo, pale and handsome under the holy light, the perfect picture of a man who'd suffered and survived. Camille stood beside him in a dress worth more than my entire old life, one hand resting often against her stomach. She looked beautiful and nervous, and not entirely innocent, though nowhere near prepared for what was coming. The priest began. If anyone knows why this marriage should not take place. Dante and I stepped through the great doors together right on cue, and silence swept the church ahead of us. He walked in first. Black suit, expression locked down, power moving beside him like a shadow. Every guest froze. Mothers grabbed their daughters' hands. Men lowered their eyes instinctively. The bride collector had walked into someone else's wedding. Then I stepped in beside him. Not in white, never in white again for another man's story. Black silk, elegant and plain. The Serrano ring on my hand. No veil hiding my eyes from him. I wanted Julian to see exactly what he'd lost when his whole world collapsed. The sound he made wasn't even a word. His face drained of color so completely I thought for a moment he might actually fall. Camille turned, confused. The guests began whispering. Someone said my name like a prayer. Someone else said, "That's Nora Whitfield." Julian gripped the altar rail. "Nora?" "Mrs. Serrano," Dante corrected, his voice calm and lethal, carrying easily through the whole cathedral. The whisper became a wave. Julian tried to recover, stepping toward me with tears already forming, because performance had always been the only language he truly spoke fluently. "Nora," he breathed. "Thank God. What has he done to you?" I looked at him and felt nothing soft at all. That surprised me. I'd expected rage. Instead, I felt clean. "No, Julian," I said. "Today we talk about what you did to me." His eyes flicked toward the crowd, already calculating exits and witnesses. I recognized the look now. "You're confused," he said gently, using the voice that used to make me feel safe. "He took you. He brainwashed you. Everyone knows what Dante Serrano does to brides." I smiled a little. "Yes," I said. "You counted on exactly that." Camille's hand tightened on her stomach. "Julian," she said. He ignored her completely. "Nora, please, come with me. I can still protect you." Dante shifted slightly beside me, but I touched his arm and he stilled instantly. That small act of restraint did more damage to Julian in front of that room than any threat ever could have. The whole cathedral watched the monster pause, simply because his wife asked him to. I lifted a small recorder. Something flickered across Julian's face. "You told this whole city Dante stole me," I said. "You told them you fought for me. You told them you lost the love of your life." "I did," he snapped, panic finally cracking his gentle mask. "I lost you." "No," I said. "You delivered me." I pressed play. His own voice filled the cathedral. "Camille can't be involved. She's carrying my child. Serrano wants a bride, not the woman I love. Nora believes everything I say. She'll wear the dress, take the road, cry my name like it's real. By sunset, everyone will blame the bride collector." Camille staggered back like the recording had struck her physically. The church erupted. "That's fake," Julian shouted. But Dante's men were already passing documents down the front pews. The route map, the driver's payment, the security change orders. All of it signed. Julian's own father stood with shaking hands. My mother wept silently near the back under protection. Camille stared at Julian, horror spreading across her face. "You said she'd be safe," she whispered. The church went quiet around that single sentence. I turned to her. "So you knew there was a she," I said. Camille's lips trembled. "He told me it wasn't real," she said. "He said he was only using the engagement to distract Serrano. He said nobody would get hurt." Pain crossed her face, guilt right behind it. "Good," I told her. "Let the guilt breathe." I walked toward her slowly. Julian reached out as if to stop me, but one look from Dante froze him in place. "You knew he was lying to another woman," I said to her. She lowered her eyes. "Yes, and you let him," I said. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I loved him," she said. "So did I told her. "That's exactly what men like Julian count on." She looked at me then, and I watched her understand, all at once, that loving him hadn't made her special. It had only made her useful. "I'm not here to forgive you," I told her quietly, "and I'm not here to save you like you were innocent in all this. I'm here to show you the truth I never got. Before I put on that dress. Her hand drifted back to her stomach. Her ring trembled on her finger. If he could sell me to protect you, I said, one day he'll sell you to protect himself. She pulled the ring off. Julian's face twisted. Cam, don't listen to her, he said. She threw the ring at his feet instead. Don't say my name, she told him. That was the true moment Julian lost everything. Not when the recording played, not when the guests gasped, but when the woman he'd sacrificed me for looked at him like he'd turned into something unclean. He spun toward Dante instead, desperation making him stupid. You did this, he spat. You took her from me. Dante stepped forward and the whole church seemed to shrink around him. No, he said. You gave her to me. That was your first mistake. I looked at Julian, the man who'd once made me feel chosen only because he needed me obedient. And your second, I said, was believing a monster could only ever make me disappear. The cameras outside caught everything as Julian stumbled from the altar and found reporters already waiting with the evidence in hand. His story died before sunset. By nightfall, the city no longer mourned Julian Vance, the tragic groom. They condemned Julian Vance, the man who'd sold his bride. Dante wanted him dead. He never said it dramatically, just asked later, in the car, whether I was certain I wanted Julian left breathing. I looked out at the passing city lights. Death would just make him a tragedy again, I said. Dante considered that. You prefer shame, he said. I prefer accuracy, I told him. His hand found mine in the dark, not taking, just offering. I laced my fingers through his. Let him live with the name he actually earned, I said. He kissed my knuckles. As my wife commands, he said. Careful, Serrano, I told him. People will think you've gone soft. Only the people who've never seen you angry, he answered. Back at the mansion, I went straight to the gallery. He followed. The room sat dark except for moonlight pooling over the glass cases. Veils, dried flowers, broken rings, every remnant of vows once used as proof that love was foolish. I stood in the center of it, remembering the terrified girl who'd first walked through that door, certain she'd end up as another dead thing under glass. You were supposed to be my last trophy, he said, standing beside me. I looked at the empty space where my own case had waited once. Then make me your first truth instead, I told him. He stood quiet for a long moment before crossing to Isabella's repaired veil, opening the case, and lifting out only the nameplate, not the veil, not the memory itself, just the sentence that had kept him trapped for years. I don't know how to be less of what I was, he admitted. Then start, I said, by not worshipping the wound. The gallery changed again the next day. Not erased, transformed. The cases stayed, but the plaques underneath them changed from dates of theft to names, truths, choices freely made. Some items went back to their owners. Some stayed because the women wanted to be remembered. My own torn wedding dress went not behind glass but onto a dress form in the restoration room, the tear mended in visible silver thread, and beneath it I wrote a single line in my own hand. This was not where my story ended. People still call Dante Serrano a monster. They aren't entirely wrong. He's still dangerous, still feared, still a man who can silence a room without raising his voice. But with me, he learned how to open his hand. He learned that love doesn't have to be a trapdoor. He learned a bride could walk into his house and never become a lie inside it. I learned things too. That innocence isn't the same thing as stupidity. That loneliness isn't shameful. That trusting the wrong man doesn't make a woman weak. It only means someone studied her hunger carefully enough to know exactly which poison to feed it. Julian looked at me and saw a girl he could train into a sacrifice. Dante looked at me and saw, in order, a trophy, then a wound, then a woman, then finally the truth he'd spent years running from. Julian gave me a ring so the world would believe he'd lost something precious. Dante gave me one only after I'd already walked away and chosen, freely, to come back. Julian taught me exactly how cruel a fake love could be. Dante taught me how terrifying real love was, coming from a man who'd genuinely forgotten he still had a heart worth offering. The day my fiancé delivered me to a monster, he believed he was ending my life quietly, in white silk and church bells. He believed Dante Serrano would collect me, break me, frame me, and let me vanish into the same silence that had swallowed every bride before me. He forgot one thing entirely: monsters can change, when the right woman refuses to become their proof. Dante Serrano was a monster when I met him. I'll never pretend otherwise. But I was never his collection. I was never his trophy. I was the bride who walked straight into his darkness, repaired the very veil his hatred had been built around, and reminded him there was still a man buried underneath the monster. Julian delivered me to the bride collector, certain that story would end there. He never imagined I'd come back as Mrs. Serrano, that the lonely girl he'd trained to cry his name would one day walk into his own wedding on another man's arm, wearing a black diamond and a love he could never have faked in 1,000 years. He never imagined the monster would make me his wife. He never imagined I would become his queen.